The shy girl gently handed over her last $10 bill to a man she believed was homeless, never knowing he was a millionaire testing the hearts of strangers. And that quiet act of kindness changed everything. Because sometimes a silent gesture of goodness was destiny's first gentle knock. The wind cut through the city like a blade. Clouds drifted low over the grimy rooftops at the end of the street, as if the sky itself had sagged under the same weight pressing on the human heart. On a cracked sidewalk amid the rush of footsteps and the ceaseless wail of car horns, Serafina stood still, like a small comma in the endless sentence of a city that never paused. She clutched a $10 bill in her hand, her last. Not because it was worth much, but because it was her one ticket to a proper meal before the week ran dry. A discounted loaf of bread, maybe still warm if she made it to the shop before it closed. But Serafina hadn't moved. She stood frozen, as though her feet were pinned in place by a hesitation she couldn't quite name. Across the street, a man sat curled on the cold pavement. Gaunt, wrapped in a threadbare coat, each coughing fit bent his body like a tree. In the wind. He didn't hold out a hand, didn't call out. No cardboard sign, no plea. Just sat there, as if he'd long since made peace with being overlooked. People passed. No one stopped. But Serafina couldn't take her eyes off him. It wasn't a look of desperation he carried, nor one of resignation. It was a quiet, hollow, but laced with something almost dignified. Each time someone walked by, he gave a small nod. No words, no begging, just a gesture, simple as a period at the end of a sentence. Pride, wrapped in a body worn thin, the wind slipped through Serafina's coat collar, stinging her skin. She shivered, partly from cold, mostly from something stirring inside her chest. She looked down at the bill, then turned toward the store window beside her. In the glass, she saw a girl with sunken cheeks, sleepless eyes, a wrinkled, old coat, and lips pressed tight against the threat of tears. That girl, she had little, but she still had a choice. Just one breath, one step. Serafina crossed the street, quietly, no more thinking. She didn't speak, didn't ask. She simply placed the $10 bill into the man's hand. His fingers were ice-cold, soft and dry. His eyes blinked, as if he'd heard a sound that couldn't be heard. Before he could say anything, she turned, walked fast, nearly running, afraid. She might change her mind, or that the feeling rising in her throat might spill out in sobs. She didn't look back. If she had, she would have seen. The man didn't unfold the bill, didn't get up. He only smiled. A quiet smile, not sad but knowing. As if he had expected this all along. And then among the stream of passers-by, they became one walking away, one remaining, utterly changed, because of one small moment. And sometimes the smallest moments are where the biggest things begin. Back home, the wind still clung to the back of Serafina's neck, as if it had followed her the entire way. Her fingers had gone stiff inside their thin gloves, but she didn't go in right away. She stood before the peeling door, inhaling deeply. The damp wood and dust-laced hallway smelled of transience, like everything here was waiting to be replaced. Even hope. Her small room sat tucked inside a crumbling building on the city's edge. Just enough space for a narrow bed, a rickety table, and a mini-fridge that had given up last winter. The silence here was familiar. Not the comforting kind, but the kind that felt like it was holding its breath, waiting for something to break. The door clicked shut behind her, with a sound louder than it should have been. Serafina dropped her bag without turning on the light. The glow of the street lamp outside cut through the dirty window pane, casting a slanted beam across the table, where a single white envelope lay waiting. She didn't have to open it. The third rent notice this month. 3 bold lines, hammering the same old bruise. She opened her wallet. A few coins rolled out, clinking across the table like pebbles into a dry stream. She counted them by habit, though she knew they wouldn't even buy a cheap cup of tea from the corner shop, and she wasn't going out anyway. Tucked beneath the coins, like a memory lying still, was a torn photograph. Mother and daughter standing side by side in the light of a day long gone. The tear split right through her mother's face. Serafina had kept it that way for years, not to forget, but to remember that some questions don't need answers. Behind the photo was a handkerchief, the fabric worn thin, the pale blue, stitching faded, but still carrying the faint scent of mint, what her mother used when she was sick as a child. Serafina pressed it gently to her cheek, like she could will peace back into herself. "If it were you," she whispered, eyes tracing the cracked tiles on the ceiling, "you would have kept that money, wouldn't you?" No reply came, only a faint crack somewhere in the wall, the house exhaling softly, as if it knew all too well the kind of people who always chose right and got nothing in return. Tears came, quiet and unremarkable. No sobbing, no collapse, just the slow melt of a long frozen surface. In that moment she didn't regret what she'd done, but she wasn't sure it had been right either. Something unnamed simmered inside her, not sorrow, not hope. Exactly. A strange in-between place where exhaustion and longing lived side by side. The kind of place where a person wonders, am I surviving, or just prolonging something that should have ended? Outside the window, snow had begun to faulty, the season's first flakes, soft, slow. They drifted like they didn't want to disturb anyone. And Serafina, like the snow, wanted only to exist quietly. Until something else began, she only asked for a chance to start over. But the past had a way of resurfacing like a stain that wouldn't wash out. If it were you, when the world won't let you move past an old mistake, would you walk away in silence or stand and reclaim your worth? Tell your story. Maybe yours is the one that helps someone keep going. The snow had stopped by morning, but the cold clung on, silent and thin as a film of frost that couldn't be brushed away. Serafina layered on a worn grey sweater, tied her hair back neatly, and slipped into the scuffed black shoes she'd kept like a quiet fragment of hope, as if looking put together might mean someone would finally listen. She arrived at the city library early. The space was still closed to the public, lit only by a dim amber glow. The silence inside felt suspended, like breath held just beneath the surface. She waited, still as a newly frozen lake, flat but far from calm. Her breath curled in wisps as she touched the button of her coat, fastening what little remained of her fragile composure. The manager emerged from the hallway, a tall woman, about 50, sharp eyes, beige coat, name tag pinned just so. She looked at Serafina the way one might glance at an unscheduled task on an already full agenda. "Good morning," she said without smiling, already flipping through the file. "I've reviewed your application. It says here you studied literature." Serafina nodded, voice soft. "I did. Almost finished. But I had to leave before my final year because—" She trailed off. Not because she didn't have a reason, just one that had long stopped earning sympathy. The manager didn't look up, her hands still moving through the pages. "Family reasons," she said with a pause that wasn't mocking, but wasn't warm either. "Unfortunately, we need someone who can commit to full shifts. No sudden absences, no interruptions." Serafina tightened her lips. Her spine stretched taut like a violin string, trying not to let the memory of that morning, when her mother walked out and didn't come back, flood in like cold water. "I'm steady now. I can work, really work," she said, her voice almost pleading, though she kept her tone even. This time the manager looked up, met her gaze, for a breath, then gently shook her head as if brushing away a speck of dust from the table. "You seem pitiful," she said, "but pity doesn't keep this library running. We need consistency. Thank you for coming in." No anger, no harsh dismissal, just a soft tone that made Serafina feel like a leaf flicked off a stone. She didn't argue, didn't ask for another chance. She only nodded, quietly, like she'd practiced that gesture her whole life, and turned away. As she stepped outside, the manager's voice drifted after her, low but just loud enough to find its way into the hollow behind her ear. "They always think kindness is enough, But kindness doesn't pay the bills. Serafina walked faster, breath tight in her throat, as if even the air had decided it didn't want to follow her today. She didn't cry. She just felt like a room without light. Everything still there but unseen. A sparrow landed on the step ahead of her, its eyes dark and bright. For a second, it stayed. Then it flew. Serafina watched it go, exhaling slowly. No one ever tells you that the first step toward trying again can hurt more than surrender. But she stood there just a few moments longer, long enough to gather the thought that, if this world has no place for the ones who've stumbled, then who will be left to rebuild the road? The small park sat on the edge of the city, where yellow street lamps cast their dim light over brittle grass and weathered green benches with peeling paint. Life here moved a few beats slower. People came to read, to escape the clamor of markets and sidewalks, or simply to sit quietly, as if this place more than any other allowed them to do so without having to explain why. Serafina chose the last bench, the one farthest from the path, under the weakest light. Night had fallen, not fully but enough to soften every edge. She drew her coat tighter around her, fingers curled around the frayed handkerchief, the last thing that still held some trace of her mother. The bond between them had long since unraveled beyond anything called love, but not far enough to escape the ache of absence. She'd been sitting for a while. She hadn't counted the minutes. The lake in front of her was still, mirroring a faint, washed-out moon, just like her own reflection in this moment. No longer sad enough to cry, not yet calm enough to call it peace. Laughter rang out from the path to her right, a child's voice, light and sudden. A little girl, no more than 6, came skipping past, clutching a red heart-shaped balloon. She darted by Serafina, then halted, as if something tugged at her memory. At that exact moment, a breeze swept through, lifting the string from her hand. The balloon danced upward, drifting toward the tall oak tree. Serafina didn't think. She just moved. As if by instinct, she stood and ran, catching the string just before the balloon floated out of reach. When she turned back, the girl stood a few steps away, watching, not with excitement but with something deeper, a kind of quiet wonder. As though she was seeing not the balloon but something else, something adults had long stopped noticing. Serafina knelt and handed the balloon back. Her hands trembled, but the girl's smile settled something inside her. "You're really nice," the girl said softly, her voice so earnest it made the air still. "My mom says, nice people get magic." Serafina paused. That one line, simple, childlike, felt like it opened a long-forgotten door inside her. A place where belief had once lived, now dust-covered from being left untouched for too long. The girl's mother came running, out of breath. She bowed a quick thank you, took her daughter's hand, and hurried off, leaving Serafina alone again beneath the oak. The wind picked up, colder now, but it didn't make her flinch anymore. She sat back down, slowly unfolded the old handkerchief, and traced the loose threads with her thumb. Inside her, no clear answer. Just a quiet shift, like the way winter stills the wind for a minute, long enough to make you believe spring might be coming. A tear slid down the back of her hand. It wasn't from pain, just the kind of tear that comes when someone finally sees you as you are, not out of pity, not because you asked, just because they looked and they saw. She stayed there as night deepened, as if she needed more time to understand what had just passed through her. Not a miracle, but maybe a reminder that even when you've lost your faith in grown-ups, kindness is still visible in the clear, unfiltered eyes of a child. By the time Serafina left the park, night had fully arrived. The rows of streetlights stretched quietly with her steps, as if the light itself had chosen to walk beside someone who wasn't entirely sure where she was going. When she opened the door to her room, everything was as she had left it, still worn, steeped in the faint dampness and invisible dust of passing time. She didn't turn on the light. The darkness felt like a silent companion, sometimes more comforting than the questions that never came with answers. She placed the handkerchief on the table and sat at the edge of her bed, ready to curl into herself and let the hunger pass. As she so often did, but then a sound, barely a sound at all, 3 knocks, soft, even. She froze. No one ever came to this room at this hour. No one knew she lived here, except the landlord, and he only knocked when rent was due. Serafina stepped into the hallway. No one. Just the muted yellow glow on the faded tiles and a craft paper envelope lying neatly at her doorstep. She looked around once more. Still no one. No retreating footsteps, no elevator doors. Only the thin whistle of wind. Slipping through the unrepaired window panes, she bent to pick it up. Her hands were cold, but the envelope was strangely warm, as if it had just been tucked from someone's chest, still holding breath and something else entirely. Inside, a piece of deep yellow paper, handwritten, neat and slanted. I don't forget those who still know how to pause. If you still believe in that, come to this address. 9 tomorrow. No name, no explanation. Serafina held her breath. Her fingers trembled, not from fear but from something beginning to stir, something unfamiliar yet not unknown. She read the line again, as if afraid she wouldn't have another chance to memorize it. Then something slid from the envelope's bottom. The handkerchief. Her mother's handkerchief. The one she thought she'd lost long ago, maybe in a moment of fatigue, or maybe just from getting used to things slipping away. She picked it up. The fabric was still soft, the pale blue embroidery still quietly resting at the hem. But now there was something new. A fine white stitch in the lower left corner. A quiet mark, as if someone had held it, cared for it, and returned it. At the very moment she needed it most, Serafina sat down, not speaking. She stared at the cloth for a long time, as though trying to trace the journey it had taken, the hands that had held it, the eyes that had seen it. A question rose in her chest, clear but unhurried. Who saw me closely enough to know what? This handkerchief meant. Outside the window, the wind changed direction. The row of dark houses remained, but the night sky seemed a little brighter, even without a moon. She pressed the cloth into her palm, then placed it gently on the table. She didn't know if this was a joke. She didn't know what waited for her tomorrow, but for the first time in years she didn't need to understand it all right away. It simply felt right. Tomorrow morning, she would go, not out of hope, but because the handkerchief had returned, and with it a small piece of faith had come back too. The next morning, the city wore a film of pale mist, wrapping everything, the hum of traffic, the rhythm of footsteps, even the morning light, in a temporary hush. Serafina stepped off the number 42 bus, holding the slip of paper, with the address scanning her surroundings as she walked. There it was, the Elm Foundation, etched into a weathered wooden sign fixed to the front of a faded 3-story red brick building. The facade bore the wear of time, but the polished glass and well-tended doorway suggested care, like a house that had once fallen apart but had learned how to stand again. Serafina paused before entering, her hand resting on the door for a beat too long. Inside, everything shifted. The space was filled with soft daylight, beige walls and hand-painted art lining the hallway. A young woman greeted her with a warm, unintrusive smile, said nothing unnecessary, and gently led her to a small room at the very end. "Mr. Wren is expecting you," she said quietly before leaving her alone. Serafina stepped inside. The room was simple, a wide wooden desk, 2 grey upholstered chairs, and a tall window looking out at a row of bare maple trees. Seated across from the light was a man in a dark brown sweater, lean frame and unmistakable eyes. The same eyes, hollow yet dignified, that she had seen on the street corner. Only now they were different, awake, clear, fully present. She froze, partly from recognition, mostly from not understanding how the invisible threads of her life had led her here. "Good morning," he said, his voice low and warm, like wind brushing against an open window. "I'm Tobias Wren," she swallowed. "You're the man from that day?" He nodded. "You look surprised. You're not homeless?" The question slipped out, clumsy with confusion. "No," he said calmly. "I was testing something I've always believed, that kindness doesn't depend on circumstance, and you, Serafina, proved that." She sat slowly, her hands curling into themselves in her lap. "Why me?" she asked, so softly she barely heard herself. Tobias reached for a thin folder and slid it across the desk. "Because you had nothing and still chose to give." She looked down. The heading read, "One Act, One Life Community Project." "We're looking for someone to lead this," he said. "Not an expert, not someone with a polished resume. We need someone who's been on the other side. Someone who knows what it's like to not be seen, to not be believed. I think that person is you." She looked up at him, eyes wide and unblinking. A strange sensation bloomed in her chest, like lost memories returning not to wound, but to remind her that they had happened. He leaned back slightly. "But before I hand you a contract, I want to ask you one thing." His gaze met hers, steady. "Do you believe you deserve to be helped?" The question landed like a mirror held up without warning. She had no ready answer. All her life she'd only known how to endure. Not to ask, not to hope, not to believe anyone would ever stop for her. She lowered her eyes, then slowly shook her head. "No," she whispered. "I don't think I do." A long pause passed between them. Then she looked up. "But I didn't do it expecting anything in return." Her voice was firmer now, quiet but grounded. Tobias smiled, not in triumph, but with the calm of someone hearing exactly what they'd waited for. He opened the folder, picked up a pen. "Then this is your first chance where you don't have to prove anything. Just begin again, as you are." Serafina reached for the pen. Her hands trembled, not with fear, but with the fragile wonder of someone who has stepped out of the cold and touched warmth for the first time in years. A tear slipped down her cheek, not from pain, but because, for the first time in her life, she didn't have to be strong to be seen. A week later, in the community room at the Elm Foundation, the pale light of early winter filtered through tall windows, laying a soft glow across the wooden floors and the circle of folding chairs. There was no podium, no microphone, no separation between speaker and listener. Just people, people who had lost things, who had once faded from the margins of society, now learning how to see one another again through the fragile honesty of small stories. Serafina stood by the tea table, her fingers resting on a warm ceramic cup, watching as the room slowly filled with hesitant footsteps and flickering eyes. She had been there once, afraid of sound, wary of looks, convinced her words held no weight in any silence. She didn't make a speech. There was no need. She simply smiled, nodding gently at each person who entered, as if quietly saying, "I know. I've been there." The circle began. A few stories surfaced. A middle-aged man spoke about the first time he dared to step into a bookstore after 2 years living in a tent. A young mother broke down, recalling New Year's Eve, when she hadn't had enough money to buy a loaf of bread for her daughter. And then a girl, maybe in her early 20s, sat slightly apart from the circle. Baggy coat, red-rimmed eyes. She raised a trembling hand. "I lost my place after the pandemic," she said, her voice cracking. "It wasn't really a home, just a rented room. But it was a place I could sleep without fearing someone would knock." She paused, swallowed. "I've been sleeping on a park bench the past few nights, and I don't know how many more breaths I have left in me to keep going." For a moment, the room held its breath. Every shuffle stilled. Every sound vanished into quiet. Serafina moved slowly. She didn't speak right away. She sat beside the girl, not too close and just near enough. She didn't offer comfort. She knew better. Sometimes even a light touch can feel heavier than a promise. From her coat pocket, she pulled out a handkerchief. The old one, edges frayed, once her mother's, once her own lifeline on long, cold nights, once returned to her as if by magic. She didn't look at the girl with knowing. She looked with recognition, like someone who had once sat in the very same seat. Then she placed the handkerchief gently into her hands. "You can keep it for a while," Serafina whispered. just loud enough. It stayed with me during the nights I thought I couldn't go on. It doesn't have magic, but it reminded me that something, however small, was still enough to hold on to. The girl's hands shook. She gripped the cloth and the tears came freely. Around the circle, some lowered their heads. Someone exhaled deeply, like letting go of a weight long carried. No more words were needed. Serafina didn't ask for the handkerchief back when the session ended. She didn't count the days until it returned. Because it no longer belonged to memory. It had become a thread, a quiet tether between those who had once lost their roots. Hair proof that kindness once given doesn't vanish. It simply takes on new form and continues. And in Serafina's eyes now, there was no waiting. Only light. The kind of light that lives in someone who has made it through the dark and now holds the door open for someone else to step into the morning. Night fell quietly, like a long arm of memory draping gently over the shoulders of the woman seated at her desk. Outside the window, the city had gone to sleep earlier than usual. Or maybe Serafina no longer looked for its movements the way she used to. She was writing. The light from her desk lamp cast a soft halo over the page, illuminating her slanted handwriting, steady, unhurried, like long measured breaths distilled into words. She didn't write every day, but when she did, it was as if she was sending something to someone who would never read it, but who still deserved to know. "I used to think," she began, "if my mother hadn't left, I would have been different." The pen paused, waiting for the thought to catch up, then continued, "But maybe because she did. I learned how to hold on to the best parts of the world, even when no one gave them to me first." She stopped. Her eyes lingered on the last line. There were no tears, no tightness in her throat, only a quiet that went deep, like standing in an old, emptied room where every memory had been cleared away. But the scent of wood, of time, of having once been there, still lingered. She closed the journal, placed it gently atop the old handkerchief, now washed clean, carrying the scent of fresh cotton, yet still bearing the faded stitching. Once her mother's, once hers. Now part of something larger, the quiet, revolving rhythm of kindness. The photo on the desk caught a flicker of the lamp's glow. In it, Serafina stood with Tobias and the team at a recent fundraiser. Beside them, a little girl with wild curls and the biggest smile, eyes lit like the first morning after days. Of rain. Serafina looked at the photo for a long time, then exhaled. Not the sigh of someone worn down, but of someone who had come far enough to understand. Some journeys don't begin with a reason, only with one person brave enough to take the first step. She rose and turned off the light. The room dimmed, but the computer screen still glowed, and on it the final line of her journal entry remained, clear like a quiet anthem that needed no applause. Kindness doesn't wait for conditions. It begins with one person, one time, just when it's needed. There was no soundtrack, no swelling strings, just a small room and a young woman who had finally learned to believe in herself, not through triumph, but by looking back and not flinching. Outside, the cold lingered, but somewhere perhaps someone had stopped, bent down to help a stranger, not for praise, not for reward, but because someone once did the same for them. One small act can reach across an entire life, just like the day Serafina chose kindness when she had nothing left to hold.